The podcast episode you've been waiting for. We're talking about sex today on this episode of
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
If you are a new listener to the podcast, you're very welcome. We're going to grow your grammar, vocalize your vocabulary, and help you perfect your pronunciation. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And we're thrilled to welcome a special guest this week who has been on the podcast before. Bea, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Craig, and hello, Reza. Great to be with you again after such a long time.
It has been a while, and long-time listeners may remember that Bea was with us back in episode 41, in which we spoke about the article in English. So to listen to Bea on that podcast, go to inglespodcast.com/41. And also back in episode 18, where we spoke about the present perfect simple and present perfect continuous. Yep. So this is your third podcast.
I think it is. So third time lucky. They do say things come in threes. So 3 podcasts I've been on, and we are 3 on this program today.
And because this is your third podcast, we have a T-shirt for you. So At the end of the show, you'll get your Inglés podcast T-shirt.
Excellent.
So you can give us free publicity.
Can't wait.
So on this week's podcast, we're speaking about sex, and we wanted to have Bea with us so that you get the female perspective. But before we do that, Reza, have we got any feedback this week from our listeners?
We certainly do. We have a voice message from Leanne from Panama.
Hi, Craig and Reza. Sorry to make you feel old, and I really sorry to hear this podcast here today. I can't believe it. And I've been really busy, and trying to speak like a native was giving me too much pressure, and I want to speak like a British. That's the accent that I like. I really appreciate this podcast, and I want to tell you that even if people don't send you a voice message or write a comment, you are helping a lot of people. So thank you, and I want to tell you thank you for all of them too. So keep doing this. We enjoy it, and best wishes. Bye.
Thank you very much, Leanne, for your voice message. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. And I'd like to know what's the name of your cat. I think I heard a cat in the background, or maybe a squeaky chair. So if you do have a cat, what's its name? Any comments on her message, Reza?
It was a very clear message, and generally your pronunciation was very good, but there were a couple of things I noticed. You said that you wanted to speak like a British, and you didn't say anything else, but you should say something like you want to speak like a British person or a British woman, because British is an adjective. So you have to add a noun, a British something person. You can't just say British.
So Bea, Leanne is a listener from Panama who's spoken a couple of times to us via voice message, and she's very concerned about her pronunciation. Any comments on what she said?
Well, I think what she said was very interesting, and from my point of view, it was great what she said, just to encourage you to keep on doing what you're doing. And I think pronunciation is very, very important, and I think it's fundamental for communication in order to be understood, and more importantly, to understand native speakers. I think it's also important to say, that the 3 of us here, we've got different accents. And when we talk about British accents, there's a whole range of British accents, and sometimes it's very difficult to fine tune and
absolutely. We've spoken about our accents in the past, Bea, on the podcast. Where is your accent? I know you've been in Spain for a few years, but where would you say your accent's from originally?
Well, it's definitely an RP accent. RP is received pronunciation. And in fact, it's the type of pronunciation which I teach in class purely because it's my own accent. But it's quite interesting. Only about 2% of the British population have this particular accent. So it's a typical sort of BBC or Oxford Dictionary accent, you know. So if you look up phonetics in a dictionary, you'll invariably find the transcript as coinciding with the kind of accent I have.
And very pleasant it is to hear too, I must say.
Thank you.
Indeed, I agree.
Going back to Leanne, one small thing about your pronunciation. Remember with the TH sound in English with words like thank, make sure you put your tongue between your teeth and make this sound in thank you, because it sounded to me like you were just using a t sound with thank you. So remember, tongue between your teeth and make the thank you sound.
There was another little thing, Leanne, just a tiny thing, but the difference between this and these. You said something which kind of sounded like something in the middle. I think you wanted to say, thank you for this, but you said something like these. And I wasn't quite sure if it was singular, this, or plural, these. You've got the short sound, this, and the long sound, these. Singular, plural.
Okay, shall we move on to sex?
Yes.
Let's get going. Let's go for it.
Move on. Yes, absolutely.
I'm sure the listeners have been waiting for this for a long time. Let's start with vocabulary, because there are many words that we could use to describe having sex with someone, aren't there? Reza, could you give us some other ways of describing having sex?
You immediately asked me as if I'm an expert, Craig. I don't know. I don't know.
You get first pick. Come on.
Maybe you're not an expert in sex, but you're definitely an expert in English. And that's what we're doing.
Absolutely.
That's very debatable,
yeah.
I would say as well. Well, we're talking about intercourse, I presume, yes? A type of intercourse, which means relationship between people, right?
Yes, you could use sex as a way to categorize male or female. So you could say, what sex is this animal? But we're looking at it from an intercourse, a sexual intercourse relationship between humans point of view, to reproduce, in other words.
Because there's other types of intercourse that can be social intercourse, which just means socializing with people.
That's right.
So sexual intercourse is having sex with people.
Yep. But how often do you use that word? I mean, it just sounds so clinical. You think, oh, I had intercourse last night. I mean, maybe you'd say that to your gynecologist, but you definitely, or at least I wouldn't say that to any of my friends. I wouldn't choose that particular verb phrase.
I think that's really important, because you would perhaps use some of these expressions depending on the relationship with the person you're talking to.
I think that's absolutely true.
If you were two guys sitting in a pub having a beer, you wouldn't use the same expression as maybe if you were speaking to your parents.
I think that's a very valid point. I also think it depends on, who you're talking to, the situation in which you find yourself, the relationship you have with the other people in the group or the other person you're talking to, and your choice of vocabulary would very much depend on that relationship or that situation.
So maybe we should look at these expressions and think in what situation we would use them in. And as you said, Bea, you could possibly have that question from your gynecologist, who might ask you, have you had sexual intercourse recently, or have you had sexual relations? Would be a more formal way of asking the question.
But definitely not with my friends.
No, what would you say with your friends? Having a coffee.
Okay, we're having a coffee and you say, oh, what happened at the weekend? Oh, I had sex. Simple, basic, effective. Okay, so that's what I'd say. I had sex last night. Oh, I slept with da-da-da-da. But then the immediate question, when you say, oh, I slept with da-da-da, Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. X, the immediate question is, did you have sex?
Because sleeping with someone doesn't necessarily mean you had sexual intercourse.
Not in my book. I don't know what you think about
Reza,
that.
what's your opinion?
Yeah.
It's ambiguous, isn't it?
Yeah.
To sleep with someone, it can mean to have sex, but it can mean that you were in bed together, but didn't necessarily have sexual intercourse.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it begs a follow-up question, and the follow-up question would be, and did you have sex?
Yes.
Would you ever say to your friends, if you were in that situation, I made love at the weekend, to make love?
It just sounds so Stevie Wonderish and so sort of like...
I like Stevie Wonder.
No, but you made love.
Very
I don't know,
very
Barry
Barry
White.
White.
Absolutely. Definitely not. It just sounds so kitsch and so, I don't know, just save it for the songs, not for your friends, not for a sort of a conversation you'd be having with your friends.
I want to make love. to you,
Exactly. And it's
baby.
always that love, and it's a bit of a, So no is the answer to that question.
Of course, a lot more informal and maybe something I would use in the pub with my mates or my friends to get off with. I got off with someone last night. Obviously not if you're in a relationship necessarily, but if you happen to go as a young person more perhaps to a party or to a disco or to a nightclub and you got off with someone, what would that mean? Would it mean you had sexual intercourse or would it mean you maybe just kissed them?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say, I think it's, again, I think you've mentioned the word young. I'm not going to mention how old any of us are here.
Oh, no, let's not go there.
I definitely don't think it's appropriate for a man of your age, status, standing, to be using the word get off with. It's very much a sort of a teenage, very young to be using that.
Do you think it's
just
typically
an inelegant?
Is it a typically British expression? Because I've heard American students or younger people, teenagers, say to make out with.
Yeah, you hear that a lot on series. If you're, so many people, so many of us now are following series from the US, and some of these feature young teenagers, and you do hear them make out with. Definitely wouldn't use either of them myself. I don't know about you, Reza.
No, I wouldn't. No, it's as you say, it sounds a bit young. I might be tempted to say something like, I spent the night with someone.
Yeah.
Which again is a euphemism, but you know what I'm saying.
Again, not necessarily meaning that you had sex, sexual intercourse. You could spend the night with someone and just sleep in the same bed. That's
Or play Monopoly or drink cocoa.
Well, it's always a possibility.
If you just spent one night with someone, you could say you had a one night stand. Would either of you confess to your friends if you had a one night stand with someone, you slept with them, but you don't intend to ever see them again?
Just let me make this clear. So does a one night stand mean that you actually had sex with someone, or could it mean that you just spent the night with them? If I said I had a one night stand with someone at work, for example,
It means you had sex with them.
I agree.
Yeah,
I think
for me too.
Definitely. Whether you'd actually identify it as just being a one-off or a one-night stand is another matter. To me, it just sounds incredibly tacky that you should be actually saying, "Oh, I had a one-night stand." It just sounds, "Hey, I'm so cool." I don't know. It just sounds really tacky. It's not.
Yeah. You wouldn't probably say it of yourself. People would say it about you, right? You wouldn't say, "Hey, I had a one-night stand."
That's absolutely true. That's true.
But people might say, "Hey, do you know she had a one-night stand?"
Yeah.
You might say, if you wanted to be silly, that yes, I did the business, or is that too tacky?
To do the business.
Yeah.
I'd never even heard that one before.
That's a euphemism that could also be interpreted as going to the toilet. If I said my dog did the business,
Did its business? Yeah.
it went out on the street and did what it had to do. So that's a euphemism that could be applied to sex, but it could be applied to other things as well. What about getting laid? That's very common. L-A-I-D, to get laid. I got laid last night. Again, something I would associate with younger people.
Again, I actually consider that to be, if somebody said to me, "Oh, did you get laid last night?" I just think that is so...
You consider it offensive?
Yeah, I would. I'm starting to sound very uptight here, but it's not a verb phrase I would use.
Right.
Ever.
It's tacky, isn't it?
It is tacky, isn't it?
Tacky, yeah.
Yeah.
So we agree with that then.
Yeah.
There are many different various expressions that could be used to describe having sex, having sexual intercourse, and we are not going to go through them now on the podcast, but we have listed them in the show notes that can be found on inglespodcast.com/183. So go there and look at a list of similar words, and we've also indicated and written if we think that they could be offensive in the wrong situation.
Yeah, of course, use discretion, listeners. If a word might be offensive, as we've marked, please don't ask people with that word. Use a more euphemistic expression if you must ask them.
And if you want to be safe, did you have sex? is quite acceptable, I think.
I think so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Safe sex.
Yeah.
So, moving on to the next category, which is sexual partners. Reza, what vocabulary could our listeners use to speak about sexual partners?
Well, I suppose you could have sex with anybody, really, but there are certain people that you often expect sex to occur with, not least your spouse, I suppose. Your spouse, S-P-O-U-S-E, spouse. That could be your husband or your wife, so it's for either sex.
Right. We've spoken about that before, I think, when we spoke about love and relationships. Of course, boyfriend and girlfriend, novio and novia. And a partner could be male or female. So you
That's
can have
true.
a life partner, a romantic partner. However, it could also be a business partner.
That's
because
right.
sometimes I say, I'll speak to my partner. That could be my business partner. That could be my wife.
Right. And Bea, if you heard the expression specifically life partner, what kind of relationship would you think of?
I'd probably think of a couple that had been, it's quite a long established couple. And they probably had many sort of financial commitments together. They share a house, maybe, which they bought together. So it would definitely be a long-term partnership.
And of course, it's not tied to anyone's sex. So
No,
if you're
absolutely
a
not.
woman living with a woman, that's also your life partner. If you're a man living with a man, that could also be your life partner.
I think it's a very useful word. And of course, let's not forget, we can actually we use this in class when we're actually teaching so often. And you say, okay, can you work with your partner? A partner in a classroom situation is one other person. But, very frequently I hear students say, I'm working with my partners. Now, a partner, as far as I'm concerned, is just one person in a classroom situation. And unless you're a what do you call it?
Polyglot?
Not polyglot. What's the name of the person?
Polygamist.
A polygamist. You've got
Polygamist.
several partners, but I mean,
Maybe a polyglot is someone who makes love in different languages.
maybe.
Could be.
Peut-être. Vielleicht. I've got them all.
Lover, of course, is not necessarily somebody you have a steady relationship with or even live with. It could be somebody who you just have casual sex with. Right? Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Although there's one thing I'm not sure about with the word lover. Does your lover have to be someone that is your exclusive partner, or is it someone who is in addition to your steady partner? Is there a specific use of lover, would you say?
No, I wouldn't say it. I wouldn't agree with that. I think a lover can be anyone.
Anyway.
Yeah. It could also be your actual partner. You could also, I have a friend actually, and when she refers to her partner, she always refers to her partner as her lover, and sometimes even introduces her partner as her lover, which I find a bit sort of like, oh, it's very daring. Yeah. That's my sort of 19th century side coming out.
I had a friend in Valencia actually a few years ago who I hope maybe listens to this podcast, who called her boyfriend her man. And I really didn't like that at all.
Yuck.
My man is coming for dinner, or I'm going out with my man.
What about my lady? I mean, I've heard, she's my lady. I mean, it makes me want to throw up.
Mi
It's
mujer.
I
woman,
know,
yeah.
I know. But that's the other thing I have a problem with in Spanish. It's like mi mujer. And you don't say mi hombre, do you? You say it's mi marido. I mean,
Exactly.
I always find that,
Mi esposa. I don't like that either.
no, just imagine a pair of handcuffs, which what esposas are.
Exactly.
Don't you think the word lover, though, is one of the more appealing, more attractive words to talk about sexual partners? To be somebody's lover, sounds good, doesn't
Sounds
it?
quite
exciting.
exotic and exciting. I
It
mean,
implies certain things, doesn't it? It implies a sexual relationship. It implies something a little bit
Paris.
secret.
Paris
Secretive.
without anybody knowing, not going out of the hotel room for 2 days or something, or
Breakfast
even
in
3.
bed.
Yes.
Lovers go to Paris. You don't say sexual partners go to Paris. No,
you don't.
lovers go to Paris.
Yes.
Paris is for
In the
lovers.
springtime.
Mistress, M-I-S-T-R-E-S-S, mistress. So there's master for a man and mistress. Now, mistress can be mistress of a school, for example. used in the same way that master would be used, but with a sexual meaning.
I think it's a very 19th century word. I mean, it's not a word we would use nowadays. It's
What do you understand from it, though, in case our listeners hear it on the TV?
what comes to mind for me when I think of a mistress is someone who's wearing, sort of quite sexy clothing. I mean, here's the thing that comes to mind, and sort of lying in wait for you in a hotel room with a whip in her hand and high heels. I don't know what it is about that particular word.
Yeah.
I don't know what comes to mind when you think of a mistress.
No, I agree with you. The dictionary says extramarital female partner.
Very archaic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not really used that much these days.
But mistress these days has taken on a very common niche use, has it not? Which is specifically, you were hinting at it, to do with a dominating woman who's going to be rough, a bit poco duro with you. That's a very common use of the word mistress. Now, people understand that sometimes when they hear the word
true.
mistress.
That's what comes to mind with me.
Yeah. And the word master is the male equivalent. I'm talking about, people who enjoy, kind of domineering sex. In that case, you could use the word master, I guess. Mistress and master. I guess because I haven't participated in it myself, but
Yet.
yeah.
Exactly.
Good
Nice.
timing, Craig.
Yeah.
Looking at age gaps or the difference in ages between partners, what do you understand by the word toy boy?
Well, it's one of these. I'm afraid I've got a problem with toy boy. I mean, it's just this whole thing that most of these words are so male oriented, and it's like a toy boy is an older woman who has a young lover, and once again, this idea comes to mind that a toy boy is simply there not because he considers the woman, irrespective of her age, as being an equal, but because maybe he has some financial gain, which he hopes to get from the older woman. So,
almost like a gigolo, like a male prostitute.
Yeah. But, again, maybe that's my interpretation of it.
But they are very labelling, which is one thing that
I
bothers me
know,
about
I
these words. They
know.
tend to put you in a classification which is not necessarily true. Another one that comes to mind is sugar daddy. Reza, what do you understand from that?
Like toy boy, that's also quite a humorous expression. It often makes us kind of chuckle. That means laugh a little bit. That's the older male partner of a younger woman. But don't be alarmed. It isn't necessarily a really bad thing. In English, sugar daddy refers to a man he's going to be very nice to her. Yes, he'll be a lot older than her, but he's going to spoil her. Mimarla.
Yeah, but why is he with that woman?
Yeah.
Purely because
Because of sex.
Because of sex. And there's one which has actually just come to mind. What about an older man who has a young woman? Let's think Trump here.
Yeah.
What sort of woman is that? It's a trophy wife.
Trophy
Right.
wife.
Which, again, and she's there as a trophy to show. So this male is parading this woman round to saying, look, I have it all. I have money. I have a house. I have a fantastic young wife, because a trophy wife is invariably going to be several years younger than this older man.
I would not like to be in that situation at all, because my reaction to doing that would be to think, if people looking at me would probably be thinking, what on earth does she see in him? Because if she's that much younger, she must only be with him for his money and for his status and his position.
So you'd feel uncomfortable.
So I'd feel extremely uncomfortable thinking, well, the only reason she wouldn't look at him if he didn't have so much money.
But I mean, it's
I
so
wouldn't be parading her. So.
No, but it's so accepted here. I mean, it's accepted in society, whereas for an older woman to have a younger man, I mean, people are just like, oh God, she's 5 years older. And it's like this criticism, a veiled criticism there, which I don't think happens when you talk about sugar daddies.
Yeah. Of course, there is the expression a dirty old man, which is implying a dirty old man, which is viejo verde in Spanish. That's straight to the point. You're saying, yes, he's only interested in the sex.
Yeah,
There's no other reason he's with this younger. Whereas a sugar daddy, you're kind of in a humorous way saying, "Oh, look, isn't he very nice to that that girl because she's so pretty. And he's almost like a father figure, which I know is very dodgy territory, but that's what we kind of think.
What does dodgy mean?
Dodgy is like suspicious or got to be careful what you say.
Infidelity. Sleeping with someone other than your steady partner. So yeah, remember there are more words and we have listed some more vocabulary that could be useful for you on the webpage at inglespodcast.com. Let's move on to infidelity, which means sleeping with someone or having sex with someone other than your partner, your steady partner. Reza, what kind of expressions could we use to describe infidelity?
For me, probably the most common one, I think, is to have an affair. You have an affair with someone. That means you've got your steady partner, but you're also sleeping with someone else. You're having an affair.
But that word affair could be used for business, business affairs, asuntos perhaps, or temas. So not necessarily always connected to with sex.
That's true. But if you say with someone,
Right.
he's having an affair with her, then with her, okay, it's sex. You're not talking business.
I'm just looking at these. I mean, I think what's interesting is that these verbs actually, the preposition after the verbs, I think from a grammatical point of view, for listeners, that might be an important thing to try and remember. Cheat on, be unfaithful to, have an affair with. For example, I mean, the most frequent one is, as Reza says, to have an affair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, especially if you're married, if you have a spouse, a husband or a wife, to commit adultery is quite a formal expression. And what's interesting is the collocation with commit,
Yes.
because listeners may have heard to commit murder, to commit a crime, but also to commit adultery means to have sex outside of your marriage.
Well, it's quite a legal expression, isn't it? I mean, remember back in the 50s when in the UK, before somebody was able to get a divorce, they'd have to prove that their spouse had been unfaithful.
But was it the woman that had to prove it? I'm not sure if the man had to as well. I think a man could file for divorce without proof.
Probably.
Yeah.
And then there were all these situations where, somebody was paid to sleep with the spouse in a hotel, and the photographer would open the door, take a photo of the adulterous couple, and that photograph would then be shown
That would be the proof
in the court that these two people had committed adultery.
Yeah, as you say, it even sounds legal using the verb to commit. You commit murder, you commit fraud, you commit adultery.
Commit suicide. You commit suicide. Okay.
Oh, yeah, of course.
I mean, it's quite interesting collocation as a crime.
And more expressions on infidelity can be found in the show notes at inglespodcast.com/183. Reza, any more words generally come to mind regarding sex?
Yes, of course, there are some important distinctions. If you're talking about sex, you can be gay, homosexual, which I'm sure everybody knows already, but maybe not everybody knows the word straight in English, which is the more informal way of saying heterosexual. So if you aren't gay, you're straight.
So you'd say, I'm a straight man, for example.
Yeah, you're a straight man, straight woman, gay woman.
Do you think men tend to have sex on the mind more than women, especially in a relationship?
I don't personally myself. I will never know. It's impossible to prove, but I have a feeling we don't actually.
I think it depends on the age of the man and, again, on the individual. I'm not one for stereotypes and thinking, men just think about sex the whole time. I'd like to think that's not true, because I think we do too. Maybe not all the time, but I think it would be a mistake to think that, we're some species where we only think about sex periodically. I don't know. I mean, I was coming here on the bus and there was quite an attractive man on the bus. I wasn't actually thinking about having sex with him, but I thought, he's quite attractive. Does that count as thinking about sex? Because I wasn't thinking about his conversation skills. I was probably thinking about what he'd be like in bed, That's just a little anecdote.
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, that happens to me. I see an attractive girl in the street, and the thought is, isn't she attractive? It's not necessarily I'd like to sleep with her.
Absolutely.
Although it could be.
It could be.
Yeah.
Another thing is that you'd act upon that. So thoughts are pretty harmless, and they're free.
Unless you act on them.
Exactly.
What if somebody said to you they were a voyeur? What would you think? What do they mean by that? What's this French word?
Well, it's quite a nice French. I mean, it had to be French, doesn't it? I mean, it's and it comes from the French word to mean voir, which means to see, to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And a voyeur is somebody, and you have to say it with a French accent for it to be effective, is somebody who enjoys watching others having sex.
And where might you go, Craig, if you wanted to watch other people having sex or indeed get involved in sex yourself, exchanging money?
Probably a red light district. A red light district, Luz Rojo, would be an area in a particular city that's known for prostitution. For example, there's a famous red light district in Amsterdam. Mm-hmm. And there you would find certain places where you could have sex for money. And a place where you have sex for money is called a brothel, where prostitution occurs. That's BROTHEL, a brothel.
Something I would like to mention, just connected to brothels, and it's something which has always struck me about Spain, is the number of brothels which are openly brothels on the sides of roads.
Mm-hmm. There are many.
Many.
Shocking,
and
yeah.
I think
But they are legal,
they're legal. But I mean, come on. When you see some of these places, I mean, the ones in Amsterdam, great. I believe, the workers there have, they pay tax.
Mm-hmm.
They receive medical care. And some of these places I've seen on roadsides are just like, you think, God, the people who are working there cannot be fully looked after.
And in some cases, maybe even forced.
Maybe
to
even
be
forced.
there.
So, I mean, whatever rocks your boat. But I think brothels in Spain, I mean, I think they need an overhaul.
Yeah.
The whole situation.
They need definitely to be looked at legally.
Because there's a whole other area which we haven't got time to go into now, but you think of people trafficking. Well, I do when I see these places. People have been illegally brought into the country. They're working against their will. I mean, it's slavery. Mm-hmm. It's modern slavery,
Exactly.
what they're doing in a lot of those places.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, before we move in to speak on a general discussion about sex and a couple of questions, I'd like to mention our new intermediate audio course that we have for sale on our website. In the course, there are 14 lessons, approximately 9 hours of audio in MP3 and PDF of a full transcription. You won't hear about sex in the course, but you will hear about vocabulary topics such as love, sport, family, cinema, money, holidays, and travel. Of course, we have grammar and pronunciation practice. And if you'd like more information, go to store, S-T-O-R-E, .pensioningles.net. A question for you. British attitudes to sex. Is it okay for our listeners to talk about sex with native speakers? If somebody's learning English, does sex have the same level of acceptance in society as it does in Spain?
I don't think it's a question of whether it's acceptable. I think you just, even though, let's forget talking about it in English. If you've just met people, would you automatically start talking about sex with them? Would you start asking them about how much money they earn? Would you ask them about what their religious beliefs are?
No,
I just think that, I think there are some topics which you need to be careful about until you get to know that person better or that group better, and you feel comfortable about speaking to those people about those topics. And I think sex is one of them.
For example, if you look at language and you'd speak to, you're speaking in Spanish, I think the taboo words are used a lot freer in Spanish than they are in English. I think.
Definitely. I mean, there are some, swear words in Spanish, which sometimes you hear and you translate them into English and you think, ugh. And unfortunately, a lot of these words which are used in Spanish are female based.
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're completely acceptable.
Yeah.
Like the one, I'm not going to say the complete expression, but everybody knows hijo de.
There's
Which, if you translate it, it's basically sexist at heart, I suppose, that word.
I think you're absolutely right. It is indeed.
Is it possible to have a fantastic, long-lasting sex life with the same partner, or does sexual attraction slowly fade and disappear after time for men and women in a relationship?
Well, there was a really interesting study, which I'm not sure if either of you have ever read. And if you haven't, I encourage you to research it online, connected to the bull study. Have either of you heard about it?
That's B-U-L-L.
B-U-L-L. So you've got a cow and a bull. And it was quite interesting. Apparently, if you put a bull will only have sex with the same cow maximum of 7 times.
Really?
And then the cow loses it. Sorry, not the cow. Oops. The bull, loses interest and then refuses to have sex with that same cow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I just wonder, I mean, at heart, we're all animals. And I just wonder if we don't all have a bit of a bull inside us. Whether it is boring.
Well, we are all animals.
Does the cow lose interest as well in the bull?
The poor cow. I mean, as in life, I mean, she's rejected. It's. I don't know what you think. That's left you speechless.
No, well, I was going to say something, but I didn't want to talk over Reza.
There is a theory that men, like many other male creatures, it's just a theory, I'm not saying I believe it, are kind of programmed to sleep with as many women as they possibly can. Some get to sleep with more, some fewer, just because of the idea that there's more chance of them reproducing with as many women as possible. So they're assured that their offspring, that's their children, are going to survive, because some might die, some might not survive. So the more women they sleep with, the more babies they produce, the more chance of their line, their line being reproduced. What do you think about that? Do you think there's anything in that?
I do. I certainly do. I mean, I was just thinking actually about, imagine another situation where you were given at the beginning, you really, really like a certain type of food. Okay, let's think about, you're really into paella, for example. And at the beginning, you love it. But if you're given paella every day, you're probably going to go off it, and you'll probably want to go off onto something else on the menu.
Soon get bored of it.
I think you soon get bored of it. And I do think there is however much I'd like to think about, this long-lasting, fantastic sex with the same partner, which Sting and Trudy Styler would have us believe is possible, I have my doubts.
And another point that Bear mentioned, that we are basically animals and we have animal desires. But then again, I think not many animals have sex for pleasure. Mostly it's to reproduce and procreate. So I think dolphins have sex for pleasure. I think I read that once.
Apes
and
do.
humans.
So, apes have sex for pleasure. They've
do they?
discovered, yeah.
So maybe that's part of the human condition, that we're having sex not necessarily just to have children, but also because we enjoy it, and maybe that's why we change partners.
Perhaps.
What should be, in your opinion, the legal age of consent? That means at what age should boys and girls, men and women, be legally allowed to start having sex? What is it in Spain? Is it 16?
I think it may be 16. I think they have to look into that. I'm not sure.
Is that too young?
Good question.
It's 16 in the UK.
I think it's 16 here as well.
So then you have 16-year-old mothers.
Yeah, but I mean, it's curious because in countries like the Netherlands, where the age of consent, I'm not sure what the age of consent is, but you've just mentioned about, young mothers getting pregnant. The number of young mothers is the lowest in Europe, yet it's also one of the most liberal, in inverted commas, countries. It's a dodgy question.
Yeah. And the UK by far has the highest number of single young mothers. By far the highest. I remember reading in the whole of Europe, easily, far and away. It's the UK. What's happening in the UK? That so many under 18-year-olds are getting pregnant.
Alcohol consumption, drugs, perhaps.
Something I've often asked myself when I meet someone, a prospective partner, maybe I look at this person and I think, he's a really nice guy, but I don't find him sexually appealing. I sometimes ask myself, can I get to be passionate about this person, even if there's no chemistry at the very beginning? And my conclusion is no. There has to be some sort of chemistry at the beginning, be it, physical attraction, humour, shared interest. There has to be a spark. And if there isn't a spark, it's not going to go anywhere. It will just fizzle out.
What does fizzle out mean?
Apagarse. It's like sort of, when you have, it's like a sort of zzz, like a firework when it's lit, and then gradually it'll
but I'm
fizzle out.
I'm pleased you said it doesn't necessarily have to be connected to physical attraction. It could also be humour, or it could be personality. Because I remember years ago, I was very, very attracted to someone who wasn't physically attractive, in my opinion. And I was attracted to her sense of humour, her personality, and we actually had a relationship for quite a while. So it's interesting, it doesn't necessarily have to be physical.
No, but there has to be something.
Yeah. Do you agree, Reza?
Yeah, and that brings up a question. Maybe I'm getting into dodgy territory again.
What
here.
does dodgy mean?
Dangerous, suspicious, not scientifically reliable, perhaps. But I've often thought women have to put up with, a very kind of low standard of male presentation very often. I mean,
speak for yourself.
It's true, isn't it? I mean, there's, whether it's good or not, there's a lot of onus, a lot of responsibility is probably unfairly placed on women, it seems, by society to look good. But men can look a bit crap. Crap's and poco malito. And get off with it.
No, you get certain men at a certain age who are just like, oh my goodness, is this what there is? They've just given up.
Yeah.
At a certain age. Whereas a woman, many women, again, it might be a cliche, many women don't, even at the same age.
Why do women often get more criticism than men about their sex life? Because if a man sleeps around and has various relationships and it's not considered a negative thing so much as when a woman does it.
Patriarchy. Patriarchal society. 2 words.
What about this?
Sorry.
Here's a kind of related question. Do men judge women more severely than other women judge women? Or is it the reverse, or is it irrelevant?
I don't understand that.
Neither do I.
Imagine there's a woman who enjoys sex a lot, and why not? Mm-hmm. Is it more likely that men are going to criticize her for that than other women? Or is that irrelevant?
That's a good question.
Ooh, it's a thorny issue.
Because society judges that as being very negative.
Society in general, or men more than women?
Society in general, because as Bea said earlier, it's a very male-dominated society that we have at the moment still. But it's also not looked well on. It's mal visto. It's not considered positive by other women either.
No, that's absolutely true. I mean, again, it depends on the individual. But in certain groups of women, there will be criticism of another woman in many cases who does sleep around. But, in my circle of friends, we actually do the opposite, and we think about men who sleep around a lot.
And you see it as negative, very negative.
Oh, God, yeah.
Well, I think we'll end it there. Thank you very, very much for listening. And thank you, Bea, for joining us. It's been wonderful to have you again.
It's been a pleasure.
Please come back.
I will.
And speak to us again in the future.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
would love to.
Thanks a lot.
Pleasure.
And we would like to hear from you. Do you have an opinion or a comment on the questions we've discussed? Why don't you get in touch, send us a voice message and tell us what you think. To send your voice message, go to speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. And remember, you have a limit of 90 seconds for your voice message. Or you could send us an email to me, Craig, at inglespodcast.com.
Or to me at belfastreza@gmail.com.
And for transcripts of our recent podcasts, including this one, support us on Patreon for a minimum of $1 a month, and you can receive the recent transcriptions. You can sign up and apuntarse at patreon.com/Ingles podcast. Reza, let's thank our wonderful sponsors who are supporting the show.
Thanks to our patrons who are Pedro Manuel Garcia Betegon, Maite, Sara, Carlos, Zara, Lorena, Lara, Mamen, Juan, Corey Finneran from ivenv.com, Mariel, Jorge, Raúl López, Rafael, María Manuel Tarazona, Agus, Néstor García Mañez from NéstorGM.com, that's Luces Extrañas podcast, Juan Carlos, Rafa, Bantels, Beatriz Sanchez, Jose Luis, and Miren Fu. Thank you very much to all of you.
Yeah, thanks very much, everybody. And on next week's episode, we'll be speaking about natural disasters. So join us for that. Until next week, it's goodbye from Reza.
And it's goodbye from Bea.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
And it's goodbye from Craig. The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.